Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 mini-series with the Seattle Mariners. And we've just concluded the 2025 season. Was a very disappointing year for the Mariners, season after winning the AL West. We are not in the playoffs, finished just 81 and 81 and tied with the Yankees. We missed the final wild card in the American League, which went to the Tampa Bay Rays by just one game. So a very disappointing season given the big investments we made in our team over this past off season and the fact that we also had a nice bump in our budget for this year. Certainly didn't expect to be on the outside looking in when all was said and done, but unfortunately that is the case. As we think about this Mariners team heading into the offseason, had the best pitching staff in the American League, first in runs allowed, starters ERA second best, bullpen ERA first, and you can see we were in the top five in every pitching category, every major pitching category in the American League. Kind of a middle of the pack team in terms of our defense, but the offense was not good. We ranked 12th in the American League in runs scored. The additions of Juan Soto and Gleyber Torres did not end up materially improving an offense that was in the bottom half of the league a year ago as well. So disappointing year. Do take some solace in the fact that our Pythagorean record at 85 and 77 would have had us in the playoffs. So we probably got a little bit unlucky over the course of the season, but when it was all said and done, we are on the outside looking in, and we've got to start thinking about next year. And we've only got one major leaguer on the injured list here at the end of the season, Lance McCullers Jr., who we picked up in a trade in mid-July with the Astros. He ended up suffering forearm tendonitis his last start of the year, so he was 3-3 with a 4.24 ERA for Seattle after we picked him up from Houston. He's signed for another year, and Houston kept the majority of his contract, so I would anticipate that he will be our number 4 starter again next year. Looking at the three pitchers in front of him, Luis Castillo, Logan Gilbert, and George Kirby all had solid to very good seasons for us this year. Castillo, 10-10 record, but led the league with 212 innings pitched and put up a 5 WAR, which was one of the best figures among starting pitchers in the American League this past season. He'll be back on top of the rotation. Logan Gilbert, 16-12, led the league in wins with those 16, and also led the league with 34 starts season after leading the league in FIP minus and WAR. Only a 2.8 WAR this year. He was a pretty average pitcher in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus. Hopefully we'll get a little more out of him next year. He's heading into another arbitration year and set to be making some pretty significant money, but think we will still have him back. And then George Kirby had a nice bounce back year after pitching just one inning in 2024. He was 10-10 with a 3.81 ERA when all was said and done. Led the league in walks per 9 and strikeout to walk ratio and put up a 4.6 WAR up for us. We have signed him to an extension, so he's going to be with us for several years to come. So with Castillo, Gilbert, Kirby, and McCullers, really like our top 4 pitchers, and Brian Wu and Bryce Miller will be in the mix again next year. Wu, 14-7 with a 4.68 ERA, definitely below average in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus this year, but certainly could do worse than him as a 5th starter. Bryce Miller, who was our 5th starter much of this year, 7-7 with a 4.70 ERA. He is probably the odd man out right now. Still going to be making the major league minimum most likely next year. Still his options left. His stuff a little less than you'd prefer for a starting pitcher. So he could end up finding himself in the bullpen next year. And our bullpen, like our starters, was very good. Andres Munoz, 3-5 record, 32 saves, 2.80 ERA, and 14.6 strikeouts per 9 innings. Another very strong year for our closer. Gregory Santos, a little bit of disappointment in terms of the actual numbers he put up with a 4.85 ERA in 52 innings pitched. The BABIP against him was 371. Feel like he probably got a bit unlucky. His SIERA of 312 and his FIP minus of 81 are both more than acceptable. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more out of him next year, especially because he's now arbitration eligible, likely to be making a little over $2 million next year. Gabe Spire, 6-7 record, 3.57 ERA over 63 innings pitched. Solid, respectable season for the left-hander out of our bullpen. Going to be making about $2.5 million next year. He'll likely be back as well. And then Matt Brash finished the year with an 0-6 record, 4.86 ERA over 66 2/3 innings. Definitely was the tale of two seasons for Brash. The experiment of thinking about him as a potential starter is officially over, at least as far as I'm concerned. He had an ERA of close to 8 in 7 starts this year. In 35 appearances as a reliever, his ERA was closer to 3. So that will be his role going forward, and hopefully he'll be effective in that role next year. Jason Adam could be done with the Mariners. We picked him up in a trade a year and a half ago. He was fine this year, 3.57 ERA over 58 innings pitched, almost a win above replacement. But he's going to be set to make close to $5 million next year, and his velocity has just kind of really fallen off this season. He was still throwing in the mid-90s at the end of last year, and now he's doesn't even touch 90 anymore. He's 34 years old now. You can see his stuff is definitely going downhill. He could be a guy that we move on from this offseason. Nick Enright, Rule 5 acquisition, had a respectable year for us, 4.39 ERA over 65 2/3 innings. He is still somebody who has 3 option years left, so someone that probably will be shuttling between Tacoma and Seattle in the coming seasons. Brennan Bernardino, we traded for him right before the trade deadline. He was not great, 4.74 ERA over 19 innings. The positives are the 28 strikeouts. The negatives are the 3 home runs and 10 walks allowed over those 19 innings. He is arbitration eligible, left-handed arm, not going to be making a ton of money. Certainly would be in the mix to be back in the bullpen next year. Bennett Souza, another Rule 5 acquisition, had a really nice year for us, 67 strikeouts and 58 1/3 innings, a 1.08 ERA on the season. The BABIP against him was 218, so in contrast to some of the other pitchers we've talked about, Souza probably got a little lucky with that performance. But he's another guy with option years left, still making the major league minimum, and now that he's spent the whole year on our roster, like Enright, we can shuttle him back between Tacoma and Seattle as necessary, depending on how good our bullpen is next year. Last but not least, Taylor Saucedo had some injury issues this year, only pitched 33 innings at the major league level with a 3.82 ERA. Another left-handed reliever set to make $1.8 million. Probably won't bring back all 4 of these guys. The way that Seattle's stadium is set up, tend to kind of prefer to have right-handed pitchers to encourage people to bat lefties against us. That said, we clearly need some lefties in the bullpen, but probably will not be 4 next year, so certainly one of those bullpen lefties could be trade bait for us to maybe get some other resources in this upcoming offseason. But I don't think there's a ton we need to do to the pitching staff. Really like the Castillo, Gilbert, Kirby, McCullers, Wu potential rotation, and like a lot of the arms in our bullpen as well. So for a second consecutive offseason, if we're going to be doing any heavy lifting to improve our team, it's likely going to focus on our everyday players. Catcher was a strength for us this year. Christian Bethencourt, we picked him up before the trade deadline. He hit 395 in 43 at-bats for us, a ridiculous 202 WRC plus. So he was very useful in a platoon playing against left-handed pitching for us. He is headed to free agency. I think it's unlikely that we'll have him back. And the reason is Harry Ford came up towards the end of the year, did not play particularly well, was just 4 for his first 32 major league at-bats, but he had a monster season in AAA Tacoma. He's younger and cheaper than Bethencourt, and I think he's also clearly got a better bat and is probably better defensively as well. So would expect that Ford, who will be 23 years old early next year, will be on our roster at catcher, along with Cal Raleigh, who had another really nice solid year for us. 23 homers, 74 ribbies, 116 WRC plus, a very competent defensive catcher. He started against righties for us all year. He is set to make about $10 million in arbitration next year, and then his final arbitration the year after that, the number is getting pretty significant. You can see it's expected to be about $16.5 million right now. So I think the plan for next year is likely going to be a Ford and Raleigh platoon. And then after next season, it's possible that we'll look to trade Raleigh and give the job full-time to Ford. It will certainly be a more economical solution, although we'll miss Cal's bat. So there's still a lot of options for us to go. The nice thing about Harry Ford is that he is very competent at a lot of defensive positions in addition to catcher. He can play a more than respectable first base or third base. He can basically play anywhere in the outfield, and he could play at second or short if needed. So he's very versatile. You can see right now he's got various levels of skills at a number of different positions. So if we decide that keeping Raleigh around for the long term makes sense, there will definitely be a spot in the lineup for Mr. Ford, and his bat, his defensive skill, his speed. I think he's going to be a good one for us. So really like the catcher situation. Seth Brown split the year between first base, left field, right field, even played center at least one game for us. 213 average with 15 homers and 404 at-bats, 81 WRC plus. He was real productive the end of 2024 after we picked him up in a trade with Oakland. Not so much this year. Set to be making about $4.5 million next year in arbitration. In a perfect world, I'd like to think we'll be able to move on from him. We'll find out how perfect the world is this offseason. One player we'll definitely be moving on from is Paul Goldschmidt. His career seems to be winding down. Hit under 200 this year. Did have 20 homers and 56 ribbies, but it still added up to just a 81 WRC plus. He was primarily a designated hitter for us, given that his defensive skills have deteriorated even more rapidly than his bat has. I'm guessing he's going to still be looking for decent money, not huge money, $4 million a year, but at 38 years old with his defensive limitations, probably will not be back next year either. Tyler Locklier's a guy, top 100 prospect. We brought him up during the season. Similar to the two gentlemen that we just talked about in terms of Goldschmidt and Brown, Locklear wasn't particularly productive offensively, hit just 216, 75 WRC plus, below replacement level in his first major league action. Can play first or third in a perfect world. I think he's a utility infielder for us next year. But if both Brown and Goldschmidt end up leaving the team, he certainly could be in the mix to be a starting first baseman for us, which is probably not optimal, but hopefully not the end of the world either. Nick Allen, picked him up in a trade with Oakland last year, and he has consistently been playing against left-handed pitching for us. And he's done a good job as a utility infielder starting against lefties. Hit 279 this year He's pretty versatile defensively, 89 WRC plus. Not an incredible offensive player, but that 89 WRC plus for a guy who's a good fielder was better than we got from Brown, Goldschmidt, or Locklear. So he'll likely be back next year. Dylan Moore is gone. He's unhappy with his role. Put up an 85 WRC plus this year. A useful and versatile player who can play just about anywhere. But the bat was not great. His contract is up, and he's looking for about $8 million a year over 3 seasons. So we'll likely be moving on from him. Part of the reason we'll be more than willing to do that is Cole Young, the number 15 prospect in baseball, came up in September. He did not hit all that well, 206 average and 68 at-bats in the majors, 81 WRC plus, but still think his bat can get better, like his speed, like his glove. He will likely be starting somewhere in the infield for these Mariners in 2026. Gleyber Torres, we talked about him a little bit. Didn't have the first year in Seattle that we hoped. 20 doubles, 17 homers, 68 ribbies. But the batting average was just 242, and he was basically a league average offensive player. Certainly we're expecting more from him than that. Hopefully it was just transitioning to a second new team in a matter of a season or less than a season, since the Yankees has traded him to the Dodgers in 2024 before the trade deadline, and he'll be more productive as our third baseman in this upcoming season if he can kind of go back to being a guy who hits 25 home runs with a 250, 260, maybe a 270 average. Still think he'll be a very useful player for us. And last but probably not least among the infielders, J.P. Crawford hit 250 this year, 13 homers, 57 ribbies. Close to league average offensively, a WAR of almost 2. He's a solid defensive infielder, kind of an average-ish shortstop at this point. His turn double play rating has regressed a bit. Certainly not a perennial Gold Glove winner, although he did win one 5 years ago. Have him signed for next year at $11 million. So he'll probably be back. I'm guessing there's not going to be a ton of demand for that contract, but depending on how our financial situation looks like, if there was an opportunity to trade Crawford away and upgrade shortstop from him, that would certainly be something that we will investigate this offseason. And now we'll turn to the outfield, where we'll start with Nick Gordon, who's really an infielder, but was playing left field for us against right-handed pitching at the end of the season. First year in Seattle, not incredibly successful, hit 227, did have 22 doubles and 13 stolen bases, but still just a 67 WRC plus. Versatile defender, good personality, has a little bit of speed, left-handed hitting infielder. Going to be making about $2.5 million next year. I tend to think he will be back in our infield in kind of another utility role. We know Torres is going to be back. We know Young is going to be back. We think Allen's going to be back. We think Gordon's going to be back. Crawford will probably be back. Locklear, possibly. So Brown and Schmidt are, I think, the two most likely to leave, but Brown could be in the mix to be an outfielder next year. I think that Goldschmidt, who I may have just called Schmidt, is the only player that we're 100% sure is gone, but I'm pretty confident Dylan Moore is out the door also. Andrew McCutchen was a guy we signed to a minor league contract before the season started, split the year between AA and AAA, also had some injury issues. He was actually pretty productive in the last month of the season when we had him on the team, when we got to September roster expansion. Hit 263 with 6 homers and 19 ribbies and 114 at-bats. 129 WRC plus does give us that captain personality, which we like to see. I'm guessing he's going to be looking for some money, $2.4 million a year for 2 years. He's going to be 39 in a week and a half. He did a nice job for us this year, but doubtful that he will be back. Michael Conforto, we picked him up in a trade right before the trade deadline, and he was good for us the last 2 months of the year. Hit 255 with 11 homers and 196 at-bats, put up a 123 WRC+. If he wasn't going to be looking for crazy money, we'd certainly consider bringing him back, but my hunch is off of the strong finish he had for us in a solid year in Detroit before we picked him up, I'm thinking he's going to be looking for some decent money. Yeah, $12 million a year for 5 years. I think that's a little expensive for us. And then we get down to the two big guns. Julio Rodriguez, unfortunately, was injured for 2 times this year, most notably from mid-August into mid-September when he lost about 5 weeks for us as the team was struggling to stay in playoff contention. Did end up hitting 309 for a second consecutive year. Did end up having a 157 WRC plus for a second consecutive year. Put up a 6.1 WAR, 25 homers, 89 ribbies a year after leading the league in WAR and winning an AL MVP award. So with him, it was just a matter of not being in the lineup as much as we had hoped he would be. You know, you look at his WAR, and if we had gotten another 35 games from him in 150 games played this year, he probably would have put enough offense up to have ensured that we were in the playoffs, but was not to be the case. Had an injury-plagued year, but still looking forward to seeing what J-Rod can do going forward. And then Soto had a rough first year. To my point about our pitching staff, I may have underestimated how tough Seattle is on left-handed batters, but Soto, a year after leading the American League with 50 home runs, hits just 19 homers and 67 ribbies for us. He also missed some time on the IL, batted just 247, still drew 104 walks, so his on-base percentage was almost where it was a year ago. 122 WRC plus is certainly one of the better figures in baseball when you're 22% above average, but not what we expected from Juan Soto. And the splits for him are pretty stark. If I could find what I wanted to find here. Here we go. Yes, I was scrolling way too far. He hit just 223 and was basically a league average offensive player at home with just 5 homers. On the road, 146 WRC plus, 890 OPS, closer to the kind of numbers that you would expect from Soto. So I think there would be a market for him if we wanted to move on from him. Is difficult as the field is on left-handed batters, and I can show you the information here that's most relevant, so I'm not just making it up. You can see batting average for lefties is about 10% below average, and home runs about 4% below average for left-handed batters. So I still don't think that should make Juan Soto an average offensive player, and 5 home runs in Seattle at home this year from him seems like just an incredibly low and bad number that I don't think really reflects what he is. There is going to be a strong trade market for him. He's only 26 years old. He'll be 27 shortly, still in the prime of his career. So we could make a deal to get him off the books if we wanted to. I tend to think I'm inclined to give him another chance. See if perhaps it was just injuries and bad luck that really impacted him so much. There's just no excuse for him, only hitting 5 home runs at home. And I tend to think if he has 70 games plus at home in Seattle next year, even with the difficulties of the park, he should double his home runs and hopefully at least be a materially above average offensive player. But Everything is open. We'll explore all the options. We're not going to exclude anything, but even though we can probably extract some value for Soto, unless we really get full value in a pretty big time impact player back, I think I'm inclined to run it back and see if we have both Soto and J Rod playing over 150 games in a season, which didn't happen for either of them this year, what this offense could look like. So as I think about the offense broadly, I feel we could use a good infielder, and I feel we could use another good major league bat that would play either first base, DH, or a corner outfield spot from us. I think we can, mix and match and continue to platoon at some positions, but offense is definitely going to be our focus for the upcoming off season. And as we're simming through the playoffs here, started to get some retirement reports. And this is something that was mentioned in an earlier episode, the comments to that episode by a viewer. It seems like some players are retiring a little earlier than is expected from AAA in this new version of the game. Here, Ty Adcock, a 28-year-old who was up with Seattle part of the 2024 season. Levi Stout, a 27-year-old pitcher, and then Spencer Packard, a 28-year-old, all retired. Typically in previous versions, I kind of remember players being a bit older when they kind of started retiring out of AAA. I don't think I hate it. It's different, but I think it is kind of somewhat realistic that if you've been playing professional baseball for 8-10 years and you haven't necessarily gotten more than a cup of coffee in the majors when you're in your late 20s, you may kind of decide it's time to go do something different. So it does seem different to me than previous versions. I don't know that I dislike it. I think it's probably a bit more realistic. It seemed like an OOTP 24 at times I could have players literally drafted as high schoolers who spent 15 plus years in my organization without ever sniffing AAA, much less the majors. And I think that should be a very unique occurrence. So seems like this is a little bit of a change to the game, but I don't think it's a bad one. And I just went back and looked, and it was a viewer Righteous One who brought that up a few episodes ago, and it's an interesting point that he apparently has seen in the sims that he's running, and I kind of see the same thing here. And looking at what's happened so far in these 2025 playoffs, the AL East champion Boston Red Sox will be taking on the Baltimore Orioles in the ALCS. And over in the National League, the Milwaukee Brewers will be taking on the Atlanta Braves, who have taken out the Mets and the Dodgers in the first two rounds of the playoffs. And the Baltimore Orioles are your 2025 World Series champions. I'm sure P.F. Holden is happy somewhere. Orioles were pretty dominant throughout the playoffs. They lost a single game in each series to the Guardians in the Wild Card Series, to the Rangers in the DS, to the Red Sox in the LCS, and then to the Braves in the World Series. So a very dominant 13-4 run through the playoffs for the Orioles, who win their first title in over 40 years. And we've kind of outlined at a high level what we think our plans might be for this upcoming off season, but now we'll check in on the important information of what type of budget we'll have for us. First things first, we'll check in on what Mr. Stanton thinks of our season goals. I haven't actually looked at that, but it looks like the new budget has been just default red, but I don't know what it is yet, so this will be very exciting. He expected us to be better than 81 and 81. I did too. I'm certainly not proud of that performance. He's happy that we extended George Kirby. He wished we would have worked harder when we asked him to bring in a power hitter. We brought in the guy who led the American League in home runs a year ago, Juan Soto, as well as Gleyber Torres. Now, neither hit great for us in terms of the power this year, but I still think that that assessment is unrealistic. Wants us to increase attendance. Happy with Jesus Ayala heading up our farm system. Happy with the farm system in general. Overall, he's relatively happy with us. Wants us to achieve a winning record, upgrade at second base, still wants a power hitter, better attendance, and get to a World Series eventually. Arbitration period beginning, off-season beginning. Top prospect list with Mr. Ayala, the international amateur free agent from about 10 months ago that we signed, right on top of that list. Have some coaches who are leaving. We intentionally didn't offer some people money. We want to kind of turn over the coaching staff a bit. There were some weaknesses, so these were all intentional on my part. And I think it's possible we may look to make a change at a couple of the major league coaching spots this offseason as well. We haven't aggressively turned over most positions at the major league team, but it may be time for some new influences on our players at the major league level. And to the big question, what's our budget going to look like next year after this disappointing season on the field? And we actually got a bump. We're going to have $250 million available, so I believe that's $10 million higher than a year ago. We were pretty profitable, even though the result on the field was not what we had hoped. So yeah, we got the bump from 240 to 250. Don't have a ton of flexibility right now for next year, but we certainly could take scouting and development down a bit going forward. And then we've got a lot of options in terms of arbitration eligible players. We've got to decide what to do with J.P. Crawford. So there are certainly levers that we can press to open up some money. There's also always the wacky proposition of considering a trade for Soto. And despite Soto's massive contract, there are tons of options if we wanted to deal him away. Players making huge money, players not making a ton of money, youngsters who have good potential, players who are superstars today. Plenty of options if we decided that getting rid of Soto and kind of resetting our books there was a logical decision for us. I don't know that it will be, but it's good to know that we have plenty of options if we decided we wanted to get Soto off the books. As I said earlier, I'm inclined to attribute this to one unlucky year on a lot of levels. I don't think I'm going to go crazy and move on from him, but there's certainly tons of options if we did want to do that. Looking at the upcoming free agents, not an incredibly impressive crew. Bo Bichette, who we had thought about trading for, and the price was just too expensive on the market. Bethancourt, who we traded away, or we traded for, and we will be likely moving on from. Eloy Jimenez, Joey Gallo, Nick Ahmed, Elvis Andrus. Not a ton of huge impact players. Our old buddy Goldschmidt going to be on the market as well. Brandon Belt, who was with us before, back on the market. Conforto, who's been with us, back on the market. So pitching class looks a little bit better. Devin Williams kind of highlighting things, but 20 plus million for a closer, probably a bit rich for what we'd be willing to pay, and pitching isn't necessarily the major issue that we need to fix, but there is a decent amount of pitching talent that we think is going to be free agents this offseason. The batters, as I've touched upon, which is where we could use some help, not the deepest class of potential free agents. So it's going to be some interesting decisions for us to make. Hopefully, the organic additions that we're going to ultimately have with both Harry Ford and with Cole Young will provide a boost to the offense when all is said and done, if we can't necessarily make a huge move on the free agent market given the lack of quality and the fact that we're not going to have tons and tons of money to spend unless we make some other moves. But I'm sure the team will look different by the time this offseason is over, and we'll find out what we do to change the roster over our next few episodes. Until the next time around, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.